Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Mary Coleman, and I am the Director of Acquisition Policy at the Department of Health and Human Services. We're happy you could join us today for this Acquisition Alert Industry Engagement session. This session is related to Executive Order 14042. I'd like to begin the meeting today with a brief overview of Executive Order 14042. On September 9th, 2021, President Biden issued Executive Order 14042, ensuring adequate COVID safety protocols for federal contractors. This executive order directs executive departments and agencies to ensure that covered contracts and contract-like instruments include a clause requiring the contractor and their subcontractors at any tier to comply with all guidance for contractor or subcontractor workplace locations. And those locations are published by the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force. The actions directed by the executive order will ensure that parties who contract with the federal government provide adequate COVID-19 safeguards in workplaces with individuals working on or in connection with federal government contracts. These workplace safety protocols will apply to all covered contractor employees working on a federal government contract or contract-like instrument. On October 7th of 2021, HHS issued a federal acquisition regulation class deviation to add a deviated contract clause related to the COVID-19 workplace safety protocols to covered federal procurement solicitations and contracts. By October 15th, HHS will begin to incorporate the FAR-issued deviated clause into HHS contracts and contract-like instruments, including contracts under the simplified acquisition threshold, which is $250,000, but not under the micro-purchase threshold of $10,000. These modifications will be completed bilaterally. Covered contractors must ensure that all of their covered employees are fully vaccinated for COVID-19 unless the employee is legally entitled to an accommodation. Covered contractor employees must be fully vaccinated no later than December 8th of 2021. After December 8th, 2021, all covered contractor employees must be vaccinated by the first day of the period of performance on a newly awarded covered contract and by the first day of the period of performance on an exercised option or extended or renewed contract when the clause has been incorporated into the covered contract. Contractor employees working on a covered contract from their residence also must comply with the vaccination requirement for covered contractor employees. Thank you for allowing me to have that brief overview. I'd now like to turn our meeting over to Katrina Brisbane. Katrina is our acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Acquisitions, and she is our Senior Procurement Executive for HHS. Katrina, I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mary. Hopefully everyone can see me okay or hear me. Thank you for your participation today. Very much appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedules to spend some time with HHS. We are very concerned and want to ensure that our business partners, our industry partners with HHS is very well aware of the recent EO that has been issued, ensuring adequate COVID safety protocols for federal contractors. Mary's provided you an introduction on that particular executive order, and as it is a part of the President Biden's plan out of the pandemic and his action plan. And so I want to ensure that HHS contractors are well aware of the plan. Our purpose today is to ensure that you are aware of the executive order, understand the tenets of the executive order, who's covered, what is required of covered companies, that you are also able to access clarifying guidance to understand the actions that will be required by your respective companies under the EO, and then be able to track any updates to this guidance. And finally, we want to ensure that you understand the initial implementation at HHS. While this may evolve over time, we will discuss today the initial implementation plan for HHS. And as this plan rolls out and changes that may occur, the Office of Acquisitions will either communicate through industry meetings such as this or through a posting on sam.gov. So you can be assured that we will ensure that you get the information. And there will be some information that I will also point out at the end of my discussion that I would encourage you to stay abreast of, because the changes that will come, you will be accountable to this in the FAR deviation that Mary mentioned. So I'll begin the discussion today with outlining those contracts and contract-like instruments that are covered under the Executive Order 14042. First, it's contract and contract-like instruments for services, construction, and leasehold interest in real property. Contract and contract-like instruments for services that are covered by the Service Contract Act. Contract and contract-like instruments for concessions, which including any concession contracts that are excluded by the DOL regulations at 29 CFR, which are typically those contracts providing services to the general public, principally for the furnishing of food, lodging, automobile fuel, souvenirs, newspaper stands, recreational equipment, typically the types of concessions that you'll see at national parks, as just one example. The last is contract and contract-like instruments in connection with federal property or lands and related to offering services for federal employees, their dependents, or other general public. So these will include new solicitations, extensions, or renewal of period of performance of these contracts that I just mentioned, and the exercise of any option on any of the above. And so for anything that is current right now, even though the clause becomes effective on October 15th, any extensions, renewals, or option exercises, they will indeed be covered by that. Agencies also are highly encouraged to not wait until it is time for an option renewal or an extension, but rather incorporate the clause as bandwidth and workload allows. So for HHS, this new clause will be incorporated as bandwidth and workload allows. So it may be that you will be hearing from your respective contracting office, wherever you have contracts in HHS, prior to the exercise of an option or prior to that time frame, you may hear from them to begin to incorporate this clause. Also for HHS, the new clause will be incorporated into contracts at or above $10,000 and at or below $250,000, which is the simplified acquisition threshold. So contracts, SAT contracts, as we call them, they will also be, the contracting officers will also be incorporating the clause into these contracts. Some definitions that are important for our industry partners is to understand what's covered contractors, what's covered contractor employee, and what's a covered workplace. So that we've gotten questions on throughout the last few weeks. And so I want to just make sure that we are pivoting and ensuring that you understand the guidance that have been provided by the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force with regards to these particular definitions. And their task force guidance will be something I'll point out at the end of my discussion as well. So covered contractors are any prime contractor or subcontractor at any tier who is party to a covered contract. Bottom line, if you are, and I'll get to the covered contract, are any of those that I have mentioned before just a few moments ago. Those are covered contracts. And so any party, any prime contractor, subcontractor, regardless of tier, any tier is required to comply with the executive order. A covered contractor employee means full-time or part-time employee of a covered contractor working on or in connection with a covered contract. So any of the contracts that I named before, any contractor employee means working full-time or part-time under that contract is considered a covered contractor employee. It does get more extensive as to who vaccine requirements are. And so those are things that I do believe that you want to take a look at the Safer Workforce Guidance, and we'll point that out shortly. But this particular definition includes employees of covered contractors who are not themselves working on or connection with a covered contract, but does not include employees who only perform work outside the US. So back to the first part of that was it includes employees of covered contractors who are not themselves working on or in connection with a covered contract. And so that would mean it also includes maybe those who are part of your overhead, such as maybe your human resources, your general counsel, or budget. They may not be directly supporting maybe in a workplace or actually directly doing the work that is required by a covered contract, but rather they may be your support and overhead. They are also included. The covered contractor workplaces, I'm going to move on to that definition. They are locations that are controlled by a covered contractor at which any employee of a covered contractor working on or in connection with a covered contract is likely to be present during the period of performance for a covered contract. So it is the covered contractor who workplace, and the employee works at that workplace of the covered contractor. That is considered a covered contractor workplace, any location controlled by the covered contractor. I'll now go on to the key points in the guidance and requirements for contractors. So there are some noteworthy points that I want to highlight, and that is parties who contract with the federal government must provide adequate COVID-19 safeguards in workplaces with individuals working on or in connection with the federal government contract or contract-like instrument. So it is highly encouraged that not only in the federal workspaces, but also in the covered contractor controlled facilities, that safeguards are also put in place. Because COVID-19 is highly transmittable, these workplace safety protocols are intended to apply to covered contractor employees, including subcontractor employees in covered contractor workplaces who are not working on a federal government contract or contract-like instrument. So once again, it is a broader than just those who are working on your specific government contract, but also those that may be your overhead, and also your other employees that may be working on maybe commercial contracts or other work that are actually in the same spaces as those that are working on covered government contracts or working, supporting government covered contracts. So it's a mouthful there with regards to covered contracts, but it does get a little more complex with regards to the applicability and those that are covered. And so it is very, very important to remember who is covered, and that it does extend beyond just those individuals who are direct support to the covered contract. All right. So pursuant to the guidance that was issued on September 24th, 2021, and that is the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force Guidance. And you will be able to locate that at the saferfederalworkforce.gov. All of their guidance is located there. That guidance is also going to be a part of the clause that you will receive that will be incorporated into your contracts. That guidance may evolve over time, and contractors will be responsible for ensuring that they are tracking any changes and updates to that specific requirement as it occurs once it is incorporated into your contract. So you do want to make sure you're visiting that website and ensuring that you're staying up to date with any changes that occurs in that particular guidance. All right. So the other specific details that I do want to mention is compliance by covered contractor employees and visitors with the guidance guidance is related to masking and physical distancing while in covered workplaces. Very important that understand that there will be masking and physical distancing required in federal workspaces, but it is actually encouraged highly in the contractor controlled workspaces. So there were several questions about accommodations. So just want to highlight that federal contractor employees that are seeking reasonable accommodations for medical reasons or firmly held religious or spiritual beliefs must follow their respective accommodation protocols and policies within your respective company or corporate environments to be considered for any or such accommodations. Any adjudications of accommodations will not be considered or heard by government officials for contractor employees. So please ensure that your company workforce is aware of your corporate reasonable accommodation policies. Covered contractor coordinators also is a part of the guidance. And so each vendor is responsible to appoint a coordinator. How you do that will be up to your discretion, but that coordinator will convey to their respective HHS contracting officer representative their compliance with the executive order. What I have recommended to the HCAs across HHS is that potentially this may be a way for, it may be reasonable for vendors to also provide this as a statement in their monthly report after the clause has been incorporated that their company is in compliance. The Corps will not collect any information, neither will the contracting officers. So we are just looking to see that you are compliant. Thumbs up, thumbs down from your covered contractor coordinator that is outlined in the guidance is sufficient, and no names, no specific statuses. You know, we're not interested in who you provided reasonable accommodations to. That will be your decision as their company leadership. But we're just interested in understanding or knowing that you have complied with the actual executive order and the resultant clause. And that's probably the extent of it. You may receive information from the Corps or contracting officer representative that asks you to validate that your company is in compliance, you know, and again, that could be an email statement or it could also be included in a monthly report. And that will be up to the individual contracting officers on how they will handle that. Right, I'm going to switch gears here just slightly to cover a few questions that HHS has received in the multiple inquiries, just so that we can make sure that we clarify those specifics. One is on, as I mentioned earlier, covered contractors working remotely or working in a covered contractor workspace from their residence or other than a federal workspace. Do they have to be vaccinated? So the answer to that is kind of widespread, but it is simple. Any individual on a covered contract from their residence or otherwise is a covered contractor employee and must comply with the vaccination requirement for covered contractor employees, even if the employee never works at either a covered contractor workplace or federal workplace during the performance of the contract. A covered contractor's employee residence is not a covered contractor workplace, however. And so but that particular covered contractor employee is required to be vaccinated. There has been some confusion with regards to this particular issue where there are covered contractor employees that are working in their particular residence and understanding why they also need to be vaccinated. And so that is a little bit of the ambiguity, but it has been clarified by the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force, and that this actually speaks to the covered contractor employees' nature of being on a covered contract. And as a result of that, the vaccine requirement is applicable to them. Where it speaks to the fact that while in their residence, the individual does not need to comply with requirements for covered contractor workplaces, that really speaks to masking and physical distancing. So in other words, a covered contractor is not required to mask and physically distance while working in their home. And so hopefully that clarifies, one, that all covered contractor employees, the vaccine requirement is applicable. And with regards to not having to comply with what would be required for a covered contractor workplace, that is speaking directly to masking and physical distancing while in their respective homes where they conduct their work. So the next question, will I have to attest to vaccination or take a test to enter the HHS workspace? So we do have Michael Saunders on today from our Program Support Center, Real Estate and Facilities Organization, and he will cover more of what will be required when contractors show up to access workspaces at HHS facilities. So another question, what if I work at my company's workspace and not in a federal workspace? Again, same thing, task force guidance applies to all contractor employees, covered contractor employees, regardless of work location. Additional questions that have arisen also has to do with, does the clause apply in states or localities that seek to prohibit compliance with any of the workplace safety protocols set forth in the guidance? And so, in other words, if there is some contradictory state or localities type of compliance rulings, do we still have to get vaccinated? And the answer to that is yes, vaccination is still required. The requirements are promulgated pursuant to federal law, and they supersede any contrary state or local law ordinance. So additionally, the guidance also is not to excuse non-compliance with any applicable state law or municipal ordinance establishing a more protective workplace safety protocol than those established in the guidance. So hopefully that will clarify where there are some confusions with regards to the conflict between state and local laws and ordinances. So there have been some questions that have been asked with regards to medical or religious accommodations for employees. And so back to what I said earlier, one of the things that we as a federal government will not do is that we will not get involved in the adjudication and assessment of reasonable accommodations for contractor employees. What we are looking to do is that you utilize your company policies and protocols to make those assessments of your employees, and then advise the government as to what the decisions are with regards to, in other words, we're not asking for names and what kind of accommodation. When we're looking for compliance with the vaccination, with the executive order, what we are looking for you to provide us is our company has complied, and if you have provided X number of reasonable accommodations, maybe you would let us know that and say we've provided 2 reasonable accommodations and we have vaccinations for others. Right. And there's a question here as, does the EO apply to cooperative agreements? So for HHS, almost all cooperative agreements are funded with grants, with the exception of a very small volume. But grants are not covered under this executive order. So for the small volume, HHS is determining the path forward for those cooperative agreements. But overall for HHS, grants are used to fund cooperative agreements and hence not covered under this executive order. I would caution vendors that if you are working under cooperative agreements in other agencies, that you would ask that question at other agencies as well, because HHS handles their cooperative agreements through use of grants. Other agencies may do otherwise. So there's other questions on what constitutes proper satisfactory communication of accommodations. I think I did mention that vaccination is required of everyone. However, if you are having to issue a reasonable accommodation, if either under a monthly report after the incorporation of the clause or communication with the COR, you let them know that our company has complied and reasonable accommodations provided to a certain number and otherwise our contractors are vaccinated. And that's really what we're looking for. We're not going to be asking additional questions. CORs are not going to conduct additional policing of this. We're looking for just a statement. So noteworthy is that contractors must be fully vaccinated by December 8th. I do believe that Mary mentioned that, but that is very important to remember that contractors, you do have approximately 75 days from October 15th when the clause becomes effective to ensure that your workforces are vaccinated. And the deadline on that is December 8th. And after that, there is not an additional grace period. Contractors are expected to have already been in compliance once the clause is incorporated into your contract anytime after December 8th. All right. The next question is, what documentation are prime contractors expected to get from subcontractors on their compliance? And so again, that's going to be left up to individual prime vendors and your discretion on what you will need. And the government is just looking for a thumbs up on compliance. We do have quite a few questions with regards to remote employees, both at a prime contractor level, as well as the multiple tiers of subcontractors. Just know that all persons working under a covered contract, the vaccination requirement is recovered. There are two exceptions, and that is the reasonable accommodations for medical, as well as the firmly held religious or spiritual beliefs, and those are adjudicated. Both accommodations are adjudicated by individual contractor companies and following your own individual policies and procedures. So, and I did just mention another question is, what are the exceptions allowed by law? And so those exceptions are the two reasonable accommodations. Okay. So please keep in mind that the government will not be conducting a collaborative reasonable accommodation discussion. We are going to depend on our vendor partners to manage their internal processes and policies with regards to granting this. So we do have quite a few questions on this. And so just want you to know that we do not intend to hold collaborative discussions with regards to your individual company, reasonable accommodations, policies. That is going to be at your discretion and handling that with your employees. Last question that I'll cover today is there a website to demonstrate my compliance? And so to date, there is no website to demonstrate your compliance. However, as I mentioned earlier, either a communique with the contracting officer representative to let them know that your company is compliant, or an inclusion in a deliverable, a monthly report is also acceptable. Right, next I will cover HHS execution of the EO under contracts as well. So Mary mentioned that on October 7th, HHS Office of Acquisitions issued the FAR deviation to its contracting officers to instruct contracting officers to incorporate the new clause into contracts and contract-like instruments. So again, you will see this new clause in new solicitations, extensions or renewals or period of performance. And then again, as bandwidth and workload allows, we will also across HHS begin to incorporate these in ongoing contracts. I do want to add that the clause will also be incorporated into the government-wide contract, CIO SB3, that the base contracts, it will be incorporated on or about 15 October. So the teams, of course, as you could imagine, bandwidth and workload can sometimes be an issue. And so the teams are working as quickly as they can. However, it'll be on or about 15 October, and that is this Friday. If not, likely they will have those completed within a few days afterwards. But that's when you can expect for those of you who do business with us through CIO-SP3. So keep in mind that when you receive these, I myself, as well as the COs, will strongly encourage contractors to accept the modification. These modifications are bilateral. Very important. They are bilateral, which means you will have to sign them when you receive the modification to incorporate the new clause into your contract. So please, we strongly encourage that you do accept the bilateral modification and sign them and return them. I will also add that any of you that may be doing business with HHS through the use of your federal supply schedules or other GWACs such as OASIS STARS and NASA SOUP, that you should also review their website for their guidance on what they are doing to make sure that you are in compliance with their specific requirements to ensure that you are still able to be viewed and utilized as a vendor under these contracts. So moving on to the timelines for responses to the requirements. As to the vaccination requirement, I mentioned earlier that it is December 8th. Covered contractor employees must be fully vaccinated by November 8th. And fully vaccinated actually really means 2 weeks after the last. If you're getting one of the vaccinations that requires 2 shots, it's 2 weeks after you have received the last shot of the vaccination. So, and I mentioned earlier, after December 8th, all covered contractor employees must be fully vaccinated by the first day of the period of performance on a newly awarded contract, on a newly awarded covered contract, and by the first day of performance on an exercise option or extended or when the clause has been incorporated into the contract. So keep in mind that HHS will be working diligently to incorporate the clause in ongoing contracts, meaning contracts that are already in place on October 15th when the clause becomes active. We will be working to incorporate this clause as quickly as possible. So I would say it this way. It would not be reasonable to expect that if your contract just got awarded this past September, or in June or July or August, that you would, when it's time for an option exercise, that we would be waiting until that time to incorporate the clause. So please ensure that you are paying attention to this guidance and keeping in mind that covered contractor employees must be fully vaccinated no later than December 8th. So in closing, I do want to invite you to visit the Safer Federal Workforce website at saferfederalworkforce.gov. The information covered there as it relates to this executive order and to the guidance issued on September 24th is on that website. So very, very important information for you to review and to track. It's quite a bit of reading. I would say that you take some time where you can read and ensure that you are understanding the information that is conveyed, and additionally, that you are also ensuring that you're incorporating this into your practice and in your respective companies. There are multiple pieces of information. There are frequently asked questions on the website, as well as opportunities to ask questions. We will also be posting the questions and answers to those that I just provided on sam.gov with another message to industry. But overall, you will continue to get communication from us either via an industry meeting or through sam.gov. But for those questions that I just went over, and then there were some that we received right before the event, we will be answering those, and we will post those to our sam.gov site either late this week or early into next week. There's other specific information that's located on the Safer Federal Workforce website that I would also request that you give your attention to. The executive order is there that was issued on September 9th. I mentioned the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force guidance. That is a key tool that you will want to make sure that you are understanding and that you are also tracking any updates and changes, because as we incorporate the new clause into your contract, this guidance could evolve, and it is referenced in the clause, and you will be responsible for ensuring that you are complying with any updates or changes that come to that guidance. Other artifacts that are also on the Safer Federal Workforce website is the COVID-19 workplace safety agency model safety principles. That is there, as well as the President's Path Out of the Pandemic, the COVID-19 Action Plan. Again, there are frequently asked questions also under the tab for federal contractors on this website. I would definitely I would ask that each of you give attention to those. Take a look at the website, make sure that you are tracking any changes to the task force guidance that you see there, but also take some time to take a look at all of the pieces of the details that are there. Also the workplace model safety principles that are also being required that contractors utilize in their own covered workplaces. So again, please continue to follow the website and any updates under the new EO as it matures. So Mary, I'm turning it back over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katrina. We really appreciate that information that you provided to us, Ms. Brisbane. Up next, we have Dr. Michelle Street, and she is our Deputy Director of Operations for OSDBU. And Dr. Street is going to review with us just some highlights to small businesses. So I'll hand it over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Mary. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to discuss HHS's implementation of Executive Order 14042. As Mary said, my name is Michelle Street, and I'm the OSDBU Deputy Director for Operations and Acquisition Support. So I want to start by thanking our Deputy Assistant Secretary and Senior Procurement Executive, Ms. Brisbane, and our Director of Acquisition Policy, Ms. Mary Coleman, for creating space for me on today's agenda. So thank you very much for that. I just wanted to take a few minutes today to let the small business community know that as your Chief Small Business Advocates at the department, our team of small business specialists stand ready to help you get answers to your questions on this very important executive order. We recognize this is a complex issue and want to hear from you on any challenges as well as successes you are having in navigating this new requirement. We also want our partners from large businesses to know we are here to support you as well as it applies to the implementation of this guidance for your subcontractors. As always, please do not hesitate to contact the OSDBU Customer Care Center at sbmail@hhs.gov or call our hotline at 202-690-7300 should you have any questions about Executive Order 14042 or any questions regarding the HHS Small Business Prime and Subcontracting programs. I also invite you to visit the Small Business Customer Experience, otherwise known as SBCX, at osdbu.hhs.gov to see all of the information that we have on there about the HHS Small Business Program. With that said, I'll turn that back over to you, Mary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. We appreciate that key information. Next up, we have Mr. Michael Sanders with us, and he is the Director of Real Estate, Logistics, and Operations for HHS. Michael, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate the opportunity here today, and I'll be fairly brief. I just want to provide a high-level overview on the access to HHS facilities as related to the Executive Order 14042. Let me start with a little bit of background, and this is a lot of what you heard in some of the other discussion. But if nothing else, I wanted to first acknowledge that there will be covered and non-covered contracts with contract employees. We also acknowledge that the effective date of those covered contracts will vary throughout the implementation of this guidance. We're acknowledging that there will be a reasonable accommodation process, as you heard from Katrina earlier, and then acknowledging that there will be not only contractor employees, but also visitors that require access to federal facilities. So as a result of all of those together, what you can tell is that there will still be some personnel that access or require access to HHS facilities who may not be fully vaccinated. So to address that, what I want to do is provide a high-level overview of the process as it relates to the Humphrey Building, as well as 5600 Fishers Lane, which are the two primary locations for HHS headquarters facilities. But the reality is it's an overall federal approach, and the guidelines, the high-level overview that I'll apply here are really applicable to any federal location that contractor employees may be operating from. First, all contractor employees and visitors will complete a virtual screening tool consisting of a COVID-19 related symptom screening, as well as a vaccine attestation. That virtual tool, like I mentioned, will be available prior to reporting on site. However, we will have hard copies of that screening tool available if anyone reports on site and has not completed that virtual screening prior to reporting on site. Anyone who reports COVID-related symptoms will not be provided access to the federal facility. And this is a typical practice that is, really no new guidance that's pretty much applicable anywhere where your employees may go. Contractor employees and visitors that then attest to being fully vaccinated, defined as 2 weeks post their receiving a final dose of an approved vaccine, will be provided access to the facility. So if they report or attest to being fully vaccinated, they'll be provided access to the facility. Contractor employees and visitors that do not attest to being fully vaccinated will then be required to provide a copy of a current COVID negative test result. And current is defined as within the last 72 hours prior to reporting on site. Those contractor employees that have that current test result will be provided access to the facility. Those contractor employees and visitors that are required to provide a COVID negative test, meaning they're not fully vaccinated, however, do not provide that COVID negative current test, will be denied access. So that's the high level overview. In essence, you will attest first. Anyone who reports being fully vaccinated will be provided access. Those that do not report being fully vaccinated will be required to provide a COVID negative test that is current within 72 hours. And those that provide that test result will be provided access. Please note that the specific processes may vary slightly from facility to facility, depending on which agency has jurisdiction, but the high-level principles that I described of an attestation and providing a copy of a test result when required will remain the same. Finally, I want to close with addressing one specific question that we received prior to today's venue. The question is it is clear when the vaccination requirement goes into effect. However, it is less clear on the masking requirement. Does that go into effect as soon as we have a contract or a contract amendment incorporating Executive Order 14042? And the response to that is the masking requirements and other workplace safety requirements, such as social distancing requirements, are currently in effect in accordance with the Safer Federal Workforce website guidance and the agency model safety principles, which you heard referred to earlier. More specifically, masking guidance in particular can be derived not only from the employee's vaccination status, but it may be derived from other CDC guidance related to moderate and high transmission areas. So for example, all employees reporting to the Humphrey Building in the National Capital Region today are currently required to wear a mask regardless of their vaccination status. So the mask requirement really is related to a couple of things. It can be related to your vaccination status, but it may be related to other applicable guidance, such as high or moderate transmission areas. And let me just close by again thanking everybody for the opportunity to present here today. And we look forward to continuing to work in a collaborative environment.
All right, thank you, Michael. Appreciate that information. Ms. Brisbane, we will hand the meeting back over to you for closing remarks.
All right. Right. Well, again, we want to say thank you to our vendor partners who have taken some time out of their schedule to be here with us today. We hope we have provided some clarification on anything questions that you may still have with regards to the guidance and how it's applicable and who it's applicable to. And what is a covered contract and whether or not you're under a covered contract and what's a covered workplace and all of those specific definitions that are covered in the Safer Federal Workforce Guidance. I would ask again that you go to the Safer Federal Workforce website, that you also give attention to the multiple documents that are there for guidance, especially the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force guidance that was issued on September 24th. That specific guidance may evolve over time, and that guidance is also going to be a reference in the clause that will be incorporated into your contract, and vendors will be responsible to ensure that they are tracking any changes. So please make sure that you're getting a capture on those. Again, we will be posting frequently asked questions to sam.gov on our HHS posting on any of the questions that have been asked today and that we're going to be answering or can answer. We're making every attempt to make sure that we're getting answers to all of your questions, even if we are reaching out to the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force. So once we have a capture on all the questions as well as the answers, we will be posting that to sam.gov. Again, give us some time to do that. We anticipate that either that will be the end of the week or sometime into next week that we will be posting that. Thanks again for your time and your attention. And we will continue to keep you updated as things change or if they change, and we will continue to do these kinds of events so that we make sure that HHS vendor partners are aware of any changes and that you are tracking on what is happening and how it's impacting you. Thanks again. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Katrina. And to all of our speakers on the broadcast today, thank you as well again. I hope this broadcast has been enlightened and answered questions as it relates to the Executive Order 14042. You may retrieve this broadcast in 72 hours from now from our website, hhs.gov. It is there where you can also stay up to date on what HHS is doing. You can register your business in the Small Business Customer Experience, SBCX system. If you wish to do business with HHS, this is a great tool which allows an efficient way to gain information on how to procure with HHS. It also provides great resources to help your business grow and find opportunities here at HHS. Additionally, HHS.gov connects you to the newly innovative platform, Access to Success, A2S, where you may engage and stay informed of all of our outreach, events, and more. At the end of this month, October the 28th, we will be kicking off our Listening Lab Series for fiscal year 22, which includes the A2S Insider Series, Category Management, how category management plays a role in your small business success. Also on December the 8th, there will be a listening lab entitled HHS OSTABU Virtual Small Business Summit, Advancing Equities and Procurement. Most importantly, we want you to mark your calendar for our 2022 Small Business National Conference and Excellent Awards ceremony that will take place on May 18th through May 19th. It is absolutely free. This concludes our broadcast today. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.